Welcome, Samantha Osterlof. Samantha Osterlof is a certified advanced alcohol and drug counselor with a diverse background across behavioral health care, including clinical, family programming, aftercare, and business development roles. She holds both a bachelor's degree and a graduate degree from St. Joseph's University with a focus on criminal justice and behavior management. She credits her expertise to both academic training and hands on experience, and we are so grateful to have Samantha with us today. Welcome, Samantha. This episode of No Permission Necessary is sponsored by Grassroot Recovery. Grassroot Recovery is a sober living and coaching program based in New York City that supports young adult men who want recovery to feel real and livable, not just theoretical. It's owned and run by two brothers, and their work is deeply personal. Grassroot focuses on structure, accountability, and confidence in everyday life. Their approach is hands-on and highly individualized. They don't just create a plan and step back. They stay involved, show up consistently, and genuinely care about the people they work with. Recovery with Grassroot isn't only about staying sober. It's about building a life that you actually want to live. You can learn more about Grassroot Recovery at grassrootrecovery.com.
All right, guys, let's get into it.
Mm-hmm.
I am so excited for you to be here.
Thanks.
I call you Sammy. I don't know if the general population calls you Sammy or Samantha these days, but we've known each other for a long time, and more specifically really got connected when we opened up the inpatient unit in Pennsylvania, and you were out there. God, I don't even remember who you were working for then.
Probably
Right.
retreat, because that's when I met you guys, because it was
Yeah, I guess that's right.
it was from Mark.
Yeah. So, and through that, we both got pregnant. You had an unexpected third baby.
I sure did.
And we connected on so many levels through leadership, through talking about authenticity in the space. You're a huge advocate. You really shaped a lot of the individuals that I came across when I worked on the inpatient unit in PA. And so I'm so excited to be able to talk to you about all the things: motherhood, leadership, confidence, your experience. And so just really grateful that you said yes to being on the show today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
So you've worked across almost every layer of behavioral health care, from tech to leadership. It takes one to know one. Feel like we connected in that way where, kind of started from the bottom and worked up to where we are in executive leadership. When you look back, what version of yourself do you feel like was most focused on proving she belonged? If you really kind of look at the layers of your career.
Man, the layers are deep. Well, now, in the beginning, when you're entry level in treatment, and for me, my experience was I was just so excited to work there, just to work in treatment and to work like at the treatment center that I went to. So I think for a while there were like these blinders on for me where I just automatically, I don't know if it was ignorance and bliss that I just thought I belonged and it was fine. I didn't really feel the need. I didn't realize, and this isn't to be negative towards men. However, it took me a couple years, and then getting into a leadership position, like a middle management leadership position, when I started to realize that a majority of the people in the leadership room were men. And that's when, one of the first women that I really had looked up to, and now hindsight, it was a persona, but I really, really looked up to her because the first time I ever met this woman, there was one woman on executive leadership at the facility I worked at for a little over 6 years, right? And she was already built into the leadership, so we were already used to her. And no one at the time had yet come on to the executive leadership that was from the outside. So on, and I remember being in this one middle management team lead type of meeting, and she came in and they introduced her, and the way she walked in the room really blew my mind. Like, it wasn't what she said, it was how she walked in and how she carried herself. And I remember going to her office after, and she probably thought I was a weirdo because I was like, teach me how to grow. You're so, I look up to you, show me, you know what I mean? And I said, and she was like, well, what like type of questions do you have? And I said, well, how did you walk in that room and just command attention, regardless of how many men were in that room? And she was like, well, you see, that's where you're thinking of it wrong. She's like, I don't walk in the room thinking that they know anything more or less than I do. And I just walk in there like I know the answers. And I was like, whoa, Oh my God. I thought there was going to be some long explanation. It really was the first time where I was like, okay, now I have to prove myself. And it isn't really always necessarily with women because there is a large amount of men that are in higher spots in behavioral health. So it was kind of like the awareness, the layers coming off and being like, oh shoot, like, wait, I don't belong. And then having to figure out and work my way kind of through that over the course of a couple years. And then, leaving that place, having been in leadership and going somewhere and then not being in leadership and then kind of getting a crash course in humility from the next treatment center because they were like, the first one I walk up the hill and like people knew who I was. And if I said
Right.
something, I really wasn't questioned. Like I had built that trust and respect there to belong. And then when I left the comfort of that ground, I had to continue doing that at the next couple places that I went. I won't say couple because it didn't go to many, but
I think that's so interesting
yeah.
because that was a lot of what my experience was too. I mean, I predominantly worked around men and there was no women in leadership at the first facility that I was at, except I think me. I mean, if I'm really like, I was kind of going through my mind, some of the people in leadership, there were definitely other women there that were in, therapeutic roles, but outside of that in leadership, there really were. And so when I took the transition from being in that space to then going and working at my husband's company, which was a shift in and of itself in so many different ways. But I remember walking in and there were other women in leadership, and how did I connect with them? How did I
Mhm.
lean in? How did I lean out? Because there was honestly a more familiarity being around men and having to get my voice heard around men. I think there's like this subtle and maybe not so subtle discomfort when you're trying to create relationships with women in leadership.
Mhm.
I luckily had a mentor, which really helped me, but I don't know if Jill or you, Sammy, have experience where it almost felt a bit more comfortable getting loud around men than it did with other women.
Mhm.
At least my experience. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and also too, like, when I was younger, I had a core group of like 4 girls. And then as we got older and kind of separated, and I was in a long-term relationship at the time, so I was always with all the guys. So I was
Right.
all the girl that could be the person that hung out with the girls, but also like hang out with, the guys. So I kind of like took from pieces of that to help
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
build my confidence. So, but yeah, that's absolutely right because us as gals, for some reason, get in a room and we'd much rather be afraid of each other than be vulnerable with each other, which, over the years creates that weird thing with other women in leadership. But really cool things happen kind of when you stop, you have the uncomfortable conversation of like, hey, we're in this space together, right? And we're both gals. And we really need to come together because the other people on this team, right, that might not be women, we need to be able to push each other, to confide in each other. And at that same place, when I, had the experience and started doing that there, we really were able to come together and help each other grow, especially in leadership, because there's a certain way that you have to present yourself. And I remember reading this book, and it's called Nice Girls Don't Get the Corner Office. And if you've never read it, right, it's not about being a mean girl at work, but it's about things that we do naturally as women that just come natural to us that automatically put us at a disadvantage to men.
Interesting.
Yeah. So an example of that I use is that, I like to have a little cookie jar, right? Or a little candy jar in my office. Well, then people walk in and men may automatically see me as being like the caregiver role. I fall right into it. She's going to bring in food from the night before. She's going to feed us, these things that we do that I didn't think anything of. I thought it was being kind, or then, used as kind of a weird misguided direction into the difference between, there should be no difference between us in leadership. If we're all at the same table,
Right.
guy or girl, both ways doesn't matter.
Well, yes, and I also think that we're at an advantage just how we operate as women though. And if you look at some of the statistics, I've listened to some podcasts over the years, and actually women-led businesses tend to be more profitable. and when there's C-suite level, executive leadership that are women. And part of that is our ability to be relational with people versus the outcome driven, because a lot of times male leadership discounts the relational process that needs to happen when you're leading people. And when you look at from a behavioral health aspect, that matters even more because we're dealing with people. I think of motivational interviewing. I'm sure we're all trained, all three of us are trained in that, right? I think I've used that more with staff than I have with clients at this point in my career, because I cannot motivate staff to get what I want out of them unless they understand their own motivations to get what they need to get done, right? And so I think there is an investment in that. And again, this is obviously stereotyping male versus female leadership, but I think there is some value in those differences too. And just backtracking, I was thinking about it when you both were talking, and I don't think I really gave it much thought because I had a mother who was in leadership growing up. So I saw her step into rooms, command attention, do speeches in front of all these people. So I never thought about that. But yesterday, my business partner, male, says to me, "You know what's funny?" He goes, "I'm not triggered by you at all at work. Nothing you do triggers me." He goes, "Do I trigger you?" And I'm like, "Yes, in fact, there have been some triggers for sure." Right. And so when but it's my stuff. And what it is previous male authority figures in this space who have minimized my competence in certain areas. And so that doesn't mean that my business partner does that, but there are some times when we have to have difficult conversations where that trigger comes up of spaces I've been in where males have kind of made me feel like I don't know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And I have had that happen more, mansplaining, right? I've had that happen more with men than women in this space. I do think it's also equally important for us to have those women like you had, Samantha, to say, this is what you have to do to get to this next level. That mentorship sometimes happens in those moments, right? You'll probably never forget that conversation with that woman.
When you describe your confidence, Sammy, and I find you to be extremely confident in your role, I feel as though you're extremely competent. You love to learn, you love to educate yourself, you like to be a voice of reason and knowledge. When you think about describing your confidence, when did you realize that you started trusting yourself more in those rooms? Like, was there a pivotal moment where you could acknowledge that, oh, I felt a shift, that I was able to command the room?
Sure. After, many years, made the difficult decision to move on. And I don't think that I really had the confidence until I was out of that space and looked at, because when you're in that space and you're kind of at times boxed in as the success story, you might feel that people might have a false sense of respect for you, or you might have a false sense of confidence. For me, when I would go one place to the next, it was easier to build my confidence because I have that relational aspect. So stopping at the facility, being on site, saying, "Hey, how can I help?" All those things I had learned throughout the years. And then, what it all sounds good and great. And here I am learning and growing. And I ended up going to work for that woman who walked into the rooms the first time I saw a female really gauge. And I hadn't spoken to her in many years, but the experience I had with her years prior is what I was going off of. And I left the place where I had, again, finally built all this confidence up, trusted this individual, went to work for her, and very quickly realized, not very quickly, but probably about a month into it, that it wasn't the best decision to make. And I was there another probably 8 months. And after that situation, my confidence just as a person working in this field had been shattered, completely shattered. And, however, I'm grateful for it because it led me to, where I am today and the place I work today, which I'm one of two women on the leadership team. And, I do feel a lot of support, by the men in the room. And it's been really beautiful for me to look back on the last almost 3 years of being at the company I'm currently at, and how much they really had to hold me with kitty gloves because my confidence had been so depleted.
I don't think that's an uncommon experience, though. I mean, I
Mhm.
know we talked about recently on a podcast about like our own patterns, and we kind of talk with other business owners about like your own stuff comes up when you're in leadership. Whether you're an entrepreneur running your own business or if you're in leadership, your own stuff comes up. And I think there is a healing process that has to happen, or else that stuff keeps coming up. Is there something that you can recognize as like, this is the thing that I had to look at? Like, I guess for me, what I just mentioned, right, is like I had to look at when I feel incompetent, like there's a reaction that I have. I feel like I then have to over explain and I go into this like overcompensating, So I wonder if there's something that you've identified through this process of like, oh, that's where I needed to shift and I needed this experience to highlight that for me. Cause sometimes we have these blind spots that without a bad experience, it's not going to come up to the surface.
Oh, yes. So for me, I over the years have put, because I always try to look at my part, right? Like in a situation where someone's upset or they've done something that upsets me, I immediately want to know what my part was and I overanalyze it, right? Even though like you're the one that upset me. And so looking at like what's my part, right? Over the years, it's been for me having a really warped view on the difference between my work life and my family life.
Mm.
Um, and I'll give an example. Like there were nights that I stayed late at work when my daughter was young, and she's 14 now, but there were nights where I stayed late or went in early and I didn't need to say yes to that. Right. But I did. So I had this very warped view that like the people at my job, because that's what I'd grown up with, right, in the field, is the people at my job are my family and they care as much about me and my well-being and what's the best for me as I would for any friend. And the sad part of that is that that's not true of everybody, right? And until I had that experience to realize that like this person had no problem plucking me from a job where I was doing really well and then have this idea of it didn't hurt her feelings, right? When it's 2 weeks before Christmas, you tell me I'm terrible at my job and you cut my salary by 40%. And you don't even give me a heads up of when that biweekly, when that's going to happen. So having that situation and then, quite a few situations after and really coming to realize that I've over the years have just overly thought the best of people. And it's been a sad reality to accept that. But that's my part. Like I get too attached or I don't set the good enough boundary or, stuff like that. Or I've had situations over the years where I probably, my daughter shouldn't have stayed at the daycare an extra hour or two, right? Like someone else probably could have done the job at the facility for me to pick her up on time. And so that's the thing I think about now.
What are some boundaries that you really enforce now in your life now? Because that work-life balance that you just described is so rampant in our field.
Mm-hmm.
I think we spend so much time at work that there's this people really identify with like, these are my people. And it's unfortunate, but until you move on to someplace else, you don't realize, oh, they're really not my people. Those aren't like out of sight, out of mind.
Have they called? Have they reached out?
Yeah.
Have
Right.
and that's kind of, I'm not perfect at it at all. I'm like setting the boundaries are still really painful to me, but anything that's going on in my family is always before my job. The ones that I'm working harder on that I still continue to need to work on is, stepping back and maybe not being as personable or having an expectation that other people at work are going to view people the same way that I do, right? Like I might view us as being, family, right? But the rest of the people there might not. So, really getting a grasp on too, like if I text someone after 5 o'clock and they don't respond, like it's not a bad thing. But those are kind of the boundaries like I really try to keep.
How do you feel like, Sammy? I mean, I know you on a, both personal and professional level, and knowing where you were brought up and how that dynamic of family existed in the agency that you got sober in, that you developed your career in. Jill and I talk frequently about some of the facilities that exist that kind of grow in numbers by their alumni base, right? So they start by getting sober there, seeking recovery there, maybe having a loved one go there. and then they start to really kind of immerse themselves in the environment. The environment then becomes their family because there's people that have been estranged from their families or have had consequences because of their usage. And then it becomes this, I'm indebted to now the center, in a way, both personally and professionally. As that system kind of progresses, what I was hearing from your, talk about boundaries and what that has had to reshape in your current organization, a lot of those threads exist from that time, right? Like that need for giving back, right? And what I share a lot with both staff and clients and families alike is that, being of service is an unpaid position, which you do outside of your work environment. And your work environment is a paid position. Therefore, it cannot be confused as service because service you don't get paid for, right? So that's like kind of at base. And that's what I would really help the staff that worked on the inpatient unit understand. You can still have passion and purpose to be connected to the field, but that doesn't mean that that replaces service. So all that to say, there was extreme tragedy in the center that you worked in. Two of the most profound leaders that impacted you, from my understanding, both died essentially of a mental health crisis and took their own lives by suicide. And so when you think about like what it was like for you to sometimes break some of those threads to reshape how you show up in your career, reshape how you show up in your family, but also simultaneously be able to grieve what was such a huge chapter, what has that been like for you? And how have you been able to show up even maybe when it's been really hard?
Well, it took me probably about the first year after it happened until I realized that the responses I was having felt like I was having like childhood trauma flashbacks. That was my first experience of like having a group of people really like raise me on what I believed was to be good ethics, good clinical care, and knowing when to share your personal story versus to be professional. And I think back and I'm like, I'm grateful for the experience because they really taught me like how to sit in a room and be on leadership, how to sit and like, keep your emotions kind of settled, especially if you're a woman, don't cry in the room. Like I got to be on so many cool things where I certainly didn't have the credentials for them at the time, but there is this, you're right, unspoken type of, I don't want to label it as grooming because I feel like grooming has a really negative connotation about it, but almost like it's very cultish, there's a very cultish vibe that we loved. And, we had that tragedy happened. And what was really devastating for me is I live in the town where the facility is. And the hardest part has been really realizing that until the time that they took their lives, I just had a blanket trust for them. I never Googled their name. I never did anything. None of us did. Because even when I got the job I'm at now, right? And I'm so happy and so proud and I like have the best job and the best supervisor and I just love it. But I would never post about that on any social media outlets because I always thought I would hurt their feelings. So it was very weird when they were no longer present here on earth because all the ideals I'd shaped of ethics and good treatment and all that stuff was wrapped up in them. And then to find out that like it wasn't what it was, and that there was potentially some unethical stuff going on, to read all of the court documents and to know that they knew things weren't going well and that their decision was to take their life. That's their choice. But that was painful because if you would have told me a couple years ago that like the property where I was reborn would no longer exist, it does. It was purchased. It's owned by a different company now, but and that those two people won't be in my life anymore because of that, I would have. It's like a Lifetime movie, The
Truly.
the first death happened and I reached out to the executive director and me and my husband went on site and I was helping discharge clients and get them like packed up and help the aftercare team, like just put clients on the phone. And the family members did not believe the clients. They were like, what do you mean the owner took his own life and the facility's closing and you're discharging my son? He's a liar. And we're like, no, he's not lying. That's how crazy he was. And the way that again, like my current company has kind of just like come around and support me through the whole thing. It's another thing where I'm like, okay, I definitely got to trust these guys, right? Like they definitely have my best interests. Like, so it's been a long journey, and that's where, recovery isn't linear and careers aren't either. And, I firmly believe that I'm being tested because I'm coming up on being 40. And then in all this, my husband brought home a dog.
Oh my God. The dog sends it over the edge. I didn't see, this is our first time meeting, so I didn't know your relationship with that facility, but we obviously I'm from Connecticut, so there's
Yeah.
obviously a facility up
Let me
here,
tell
and it
you,
just,
that community, your community, I don't know if you live in the specific community, they were so phenomenal. They held like the one huge organization, it's like the big medical hospital system. Like
Hartford Healthcare.
they ran a job fair for,
Yeah. For those people.
So,
yeah.
So our office manager was the office manager at their outpatient facility. And it just happened to line up where that happened. And she reached out to us maybe the week after. And I will tell you that we are basically your new employer, kind of healing her through that experience, because it was very traumatic. One day and she had contact with all the clients. I think it probably hurt her more than the actual therapist, because she had contact with everyone, and she was the one on the phone doing all this stuff. But I will say, what's coming to mind as you're saying this is, if you're somebody listening to this and you're in management or you own your own business, you probably don't, I'm actually getting chills. You probably do not realize the impact you actually have on the community around you. It's not just the clients. We have an opportunity to also heal the staff and the families that work for us, right? Because it's not just us. It's not just the staff person. It's their families and how you are when you go home to them at the end of the night, and how you create their experience so they can actually have that work-life balance and be a regulated person going home to parent their own children now, right? Because so I think like that experience really showed what that ripple effect is. That happened over that nationwide. That story affected people everywhere.
There was beauty in it because of living in this town. For the first 6 months, I couldn't, every time I left my house, right? Whether it was to go to to get gas, or, to get coffee or grocery shopping or whatever it was, I would get emotional every day because, we talk about these in recovery, we talk about like the ties that bind us together, right? And every single day of those, I think it was about 6 months, because I would come home crying. My husband would be like, "Oh my God, what is happening now?" And I'm like, "I just saw so-and-so, the driver at Turkey." And it was the day after Scott, which was the second individual that we lost. I went into the Turkey Hill to get cigarettes to soothe my grief. And I looked up, and it's it's one of the drivers that I worked with when I was there. And the way that I am, like, I'm very empathetic. I build relationships quickly. I somehow am able to maintain them. So that wasn't just a job for me for 6 years. That was like
a lifestyle.
It was like being the senior that stays an extra year, like it was like every time I went back to the facility, anytime that like I went to one of their outings or was invited to one of their parties, even though I no longer worked there, like I was the person that just got to walk in, and people be like, "Oh, Samantha," it's like everybody knows, who you are. And then all of a sudden, me and the driver are hysterically crying, hugging in Turkey Hill. Okay. No lie. The cash register lady starts crying, right? Because she's so upset about it, because she really loved when the outpatient clients would come in to buy energy drinks and probably vapes and cigarettes. And she loved watching how they would change. And she was devastated to hear that the facility was going to have to close. So like this community that I have lived in for, almost 14, 15 years, they were devastated too, because it was jobs. Like people who were struggling to get entry-level jobs in our community had jobs at retreat where they felt so like meaningful and fulfilled, but it took a lot of jobs away. And then again, I'm going to get, a Big Mac because I'm sad. And I go through, and then again, I'm crying at the drive-through because one of the women that worked in the kitchen is working there. And I'm like hysterical, And so the beauty of it was that I don't think a day goes by since they have passed that I don't run into someone who's connected to someone who's connected like to my ripple or to the story. And those are the things that like I really try to lean into so that I don't get caught up in the grief and the anger and that like betrayal, the betrayal piece of it. But it's a needed service, and the community was very, because retreat did a lot for the communities that they resided in. I mean, in our town, we were on the parade float every year and making donations to the chamber and the borough. So coming through that now too, I'm like, no more severe traumas now, please, anybody. For the next, like I told my parents, my in-laws, no one can you cannot have any issues for the next year. We just need a soft year to land here. 2026 is it. But yeah, being at an employer now that, if I look at my job, we have a lot of women that work for a facility that are different levels of leadership. And so I definitely think it's changing, but I'm grateful for my job it's owned and operated by 3 clinicians. How are they not going to heal me? You know what I mean? I'm looking sad. They're not going to let me be sad.
So I think that makes such a difference, right? I mean, our IOP is clinician led too. And we had so many conversations prior to
When they
opening
asked me, "Are
around
you
the culture."
okay?" When they said, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Don't look at me. Don't look me in the eye. Okay? I got a dad complex. Stop it. If you tell me that you're upset with me, I will cry." But they've
But
been
what
here.
has that, I mean, what has that like really, there's so many things that have occurred for you over the last couple of years. I mean, when you really start to unpack it all, I really can't imagine. I know that we had countless conversations about, how you felt supported and, doing whatever the community could, myself included, to check on you and others that have really been impacted. But putting that in a box, like temporarily for this conversation, you then were jumping into a new version of you, a new version of motherhood, bringing a child into the world that you were so terrified, and
Terrified.
everything was happening through all the different elements of your your transitions, your chapters. What do you feel like you had to change, unlearn, embrace? I mean, what did it look like coming into motherhood with a third baby in a very different time frame and a very different season of your life? I mean, it was completely different.
I will say that it definitely was an adjustment. They wanted me to take a full 12 off, and I was like, after 6, I need to come back. And the adjustment for me really was, my kids, my older 2, I was early into my career. I was working on getting degrees, and I wasn't as still back then as I am now. And some of that stillness does come from, for the first time ever, like having an employer that it'd been a while since I had where I felt like, okay, I truly can put my kids first. Like, it doesn't matter if it's the end of the month and when the missions need to be in, right? Like, I can stay home. They're sick. This is where I need to be. So having that support, I came back from maternity leave, walked into the office, and then was told that I was being promoted onto leadership. And oh yeah, the leadership meeting we have weekly starts in 10 minutes. You can take your seat over here in this room. And I'm like, anybody just hear that? I went on a maternity leave and came back and they put me on the leadership team. Is this really happening? And so that was like mind blowing, and really keeping my boundary like, hey, this is what I need, to be sane. Through the last couple days where we've had snow and my kid, when you have 3, like the ratio just adds of like things that can go wrong or kid that will get sick. So like they were sick, they were off school, we were snowed in. And it got to a point by like 1:00 that day that I said, listen, I just can't. I cannot. I'm not going to make any of the rest of my meetings today. Like I'm gonna push them because the 2.5-year-old's crawling on me, literally crawling on me, feral, like on the screen. And feeling and knowing and trusting that wasn't going to make me lose my job. One thing that was really hard for me, and I still work on it, is that when my boss calls, I don't immediately go, "What happened?" or "What's wrong?" Or I don't immediately think that he's calling to tell me I did something wrong or to like correct me.
It is such I feel that in my body.
He's
I
like,
mean,
"Oh, you didn't freak out this time." And I'm like, "No, I'm trying to we're trying to lean into trust." Yeah.
yeah. And I think some of the ways in which, I mean, I've watched from the peripheral, but some of the ways that you've been able to do that through doing offsites, through connecting with leadership outside of the day to day, right?
Yeah.
Being able to zoom out and become more proactive than reactive. Everything that we tell, I'm a big believer that a lot of the things that we tell our families that we're helping to do, we don't actually do in our centers and in our facilities. And so we become just as dysfunctional as the family systems that we're trying to help, but we're able to put on this mask to basically help them for a minute. And then we take off the mask and we go back into our family dysfunction at our, in our work environment. And so just from the very little that I've been able to see in the highlight reel, right, of you being surrounded by a leadership team that believes in, authenticity, accountability, boundary, zooming out. And a lot of what Jill and I have really had to, focus on and learn is that as we go through these moments and these seasons and these chapters of feeling face down, how am I going to be able to regulate the nervous system? How am I going to be able to show up in my work environment when, I have 3 kids sick at home and I have this going on? It's like, maybe the best thing we can do for ourselves is say, like, maybe I can't do it all,
Yeah,
right?
got
Like
time out.
maybe it's like okay to say,
Well,
it's not going to happen today.
how many signs from the universe do we pass
Do we
up
need?
before we're like, all right,
Sure.
I'm waving the flag. Like
100.
today's not the day.
100.
Well, yeah, 100. I would agree with that.
But having like, first you have to have the voice to say that, and then you have to feel comfortable using the voice, and then feel safe that using that voice and saying that to your employers that, I want to hold them to the same integrity standard that I hold myself. Right. So if you say to me, Samantha, if you're overwhelmed and you got to lock one on, take a day, take a week. Actually, he said, if you feel like you're going to lose your mind, let's take the time off before you lose your mind. Right. And really being supported in doing that. That, like, hey, today's just like not going well. And, during that first year and all the way up till today from that loss is feeling safe to say, hey, I'm like grieving way too hard today. I'm like, I took off the anniversary of the first year because I didn't know how I was going to feel. And although I know I can be vulnerable at work, I didn't want to go in and have a mental breakdown. I didn't want to go in and have like a crying fit, but that safety is everything, regardless of, whether you're a man, woman, leadership, not leadership, the safety that you can grieve or take time off. I mean, if you want me to get on a Zoom with a new potential account and I'm crying, I can. I bet they worked at retreat or their husband did or somebody, and then they're going to start crying too.
You know what's funny though? We talked about that in a previous episode about around grief with, the policies in a workplace don't support that, right? You get the bereavement time, you get 4 days off. And I mean, a situation like that where an entire workforce gets let go. I mean, you got to get back to work. I will say though that there are probably owners of businesses and also leaders listening to this, and they're like, well, that's good for them, they can have unlimited PTO, but we couldn't do that because our XYZ would fall apart, and XYZ, this is why we can't do that. And we created safety. It's like, well, have you though? Because are you taking the temperature on your staff? What are you doing to make sure that feeling of safety exists? And every system is different. But we don't do a good job at what Molly was saying. We're a system just like our family systems that we treat. And are we taking a deep dive and really looking at, are we doing for our team what we want them to feel like when they show up for work every day? And I don't know that that's happening all the time. And I would challenge anyone that's listening that says, well, we can't do this at our place of business, to really look under the hood and have those conversations of like, what fears get in the way of that? Because I think that's ultimately what's behind it. And we have to show up and treat people the way we want them treating our clients, really.
I mean, I think too that, well, I guess this is more of a question, and maybe you both can answer, is what would you tell someone who's stuck in a work environment or system that makes them feel that they're not worthy, that they can't advance, that no one will hire them, like even if they went to go apply for another job, that they don't have the credentials, no one will take a look at them, no one will take a risk on them, because there are a lot of the environments that breed that kind of fear-based culture, right? That if you were to take a wrong move, that you not only could be sacrificed in your own position at the company, but there wouldn't be hope on the other side of the other company. I mean, Samantha, you've been somebody who's walked that walk.
Mhm.
You've walked through some pretty adverse work environments. So, what would you say to somebody that's sitting, listening, looking to find their voice on what their next step could be?
I would say to not stay still, right? Because I think a lot of people get caught up and they're like, oh, well, if I leave this job, well, you don't have to necessarily leave that job while you're looking for other jobs, right? Now we can get
Mhm.
in the culture of like, don't tell anyone at the job you're looking for a job or else they're going to fire you from your current job, not even adding that into it, but doing what you can to maybe ask some questions. Let's say you applied somewhere and they didn't hire you. All right, well, why didn't they? And
Mhm.
what do you need to kind of fit in to kind of look in terms of solution base, right? We don't want to continue to talk about the problem, but where can we move into some of that solution? And I'd tell that person that if they don't have a mentor, they need one. And it should be, I think people should have two mentors, one internal. So it's somebody at your job that mentors you, that's been there longer than you. You don't complain about people to that person. That's not what it that's to break down situations that externally nobody would understand because nobody works with the personalities you do, right? And then somebody external who also works in the field, right? That you trust, that can also be someone who's can direct you in the way of maybe working somewhere else. I would love to say like bust into leadership and be like, you guys are the worst and this is wrong. But I don't know if that would be helpful. But seeing in the situation, if you can't change it and you're not going to speak up about it, then you got to let it go.
Absolutely. I think you have to take some action. There has
Mhm.
to be action. And I will tell you, as someone who gave this advice to someone and it ended up going very wrong, probably worst case scenario, diabolical. But you have to, and that person was my husband, by the way. You have to speak up to your supervisor, right? You have to speak up. You have to, if you're feeling unworthy or you're not getting what you need to ask for that. And based on how that was received when I gave this advice to my husband and what happened from there, that just highlighted the absolute, instability of that system. That wasn't the right system for him to be in, right? And if somebody responds in that way to you, then then your fear has been validated. They
Yeah.
do not value
Right.
worth, right?
Right.
And so you don't belong there. But sometimes it's an us problem. Sometimes it's something we are struggling with internally, and we have to give the opportunity for people to change too. But also sometimes the action could just be talking to other people in the field, maybe not applying for the job, but what else is out there? What could I be doing differently? What actions do I need to take? Don't be stuck. Don't feel like you're stuck. There's too many stories in this field of people who have overcome adversity, who have not had the credentials and have gotten to a position that, they couldn't dream of being in. So there's plenty of people that you can reach out to say, how did you get to where you are? And how do I get there?
I mean, it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. Thinking back to the first one I had with that gal, and then kind of just seeing how everything works out and ties together, is for me too. Is that I try to be. It sounds silly again, very cheesy, but I've had some really great bosses, and then I've had maybe two or three not so awesome ones, and from each of those, I take something.
Right.
And, for the gal that I had hired who's moving on, that I'm sad, but I'm like super proud of her because she did everything to like change and grow and, get a different position. But, for her, as I've been supervising her, it was such a joy to supervise her because she, did the things I would ask her to. And, but she's going to move on and she's got to grow. And, what I kind of told her too is like, we just got to keep you moving, keep you going, like next right thing. And I supervised her the way that I wish I was supervised. So I
Mhm.
took all the pieces of like, the good parts of my supervisors, like the honesty, the being able to like have transparent conversations about your kids so you can like actually take time off, like helping teach somebody about the boundaries, like all those things that we can do to make sure that we're not, I always like to make sure I'm not adding to any of the dysfunction to the best of my ability, but, supervising her the way that I wish I'd been supervised, over the years.
What you're
To make
really
the
talking about is trauma-informed care from the top down. So all
Yeah.
of these, trauma-informed is such a buzzword, but when we really look in under the hood, sometimes we're not practicing that. And so all these things that you're discussing, honesty, transparency, boundaries, that it's building a culture of being trauma-informed for the staff down to the clients.
Yeah, like I trusted my boss. Like when the first death happened, there was a period of time where like I knew about it, but they were still notifying other staff, right? And I wasn't staff. So I found out when I was walking into Hershey Park, and the first person I thought to call was my supervisor. Not because I thought he was going to be warm and fuzzy, but because I knew he wouldn't tell anybody. Like he wasn't going to pick up the phone when we got off and be like, so and so's gone, And that says a lot about, where I've come, not just as in leadership, but as a woman in leadership, and allowing someone to like hold that space because I just knew he wouldn't tell anybody. Didn't call him
What
for the warm and fuzzy, called him, and the first thing he says was, "Are you alone?" I said, "I'm very much not alone. I'm at Hershey Park with my father and my kids."
I think too, that speaks to the consistency, right? Like that you consistently have been showing up in a different way. And then by way of you showing up in a different way, you were able to attract individuals that were going to show up differently for you.
Yeah.
So if we really break that down, I mean, if you've listened to any of our episodes, you know that we like to have individuals share what they can give the listeners. I feel like you gave so much in this episode, but to be more formal about it, we ask people to give a permission slip. So if you were to give permission to our listeners, what would it be for?
I would give you permission to give yourself a timeout. And what that means is like, if for you that's a day and you go on a run and you don't have to worry about work, I'm not a runner. For me, that's like, for me, right? Get the permission is you take a day, give yourself permission to take a day, whether you're frontline business development, what doesn't matter, right? Turn the phone off, give yourself a day, because just because your phone's off, right? In early days, in marketing, I used to think, well, then someone's going to die. But I don't need to think like I'm God. Like there's other people to help. And just giving yourself permission to take a day and be intentional about the day, take a bath. I watch Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. I get caught up. Then I get into the reels, right? And for me, that's my time out. But, that's the time. Give yourself permission, take a day and be intentional, because we don't, as women, what I'll say is I don't give myself permission enough as I should. I'll seek that permission to my husband, or like, "Oh, do you care if I take a nap?" Well, you have to reframe it. I'm going to go take a nap. You have to give yourself permission, right? Which is always so much harder than someone giving us permission.
Thank you so much. I am so grateful to have
Of
had
course.
you on, for you to share parts of you that I know were both painful. And I know that it will help our listeners to step into their power and their voice. So thank you so, so much.
My pleasure.
If you have not already, please give us a follow on YouTube, Instagram, check our website out, nopermissionnecessary.com. And if you would like to share any feedback or know how to get connected to Samantha, you can find her information in our show notes. Until next time, we'll see you next Tuesday.